Hi. Ready? Can I get everybody's attention? Guess we'd like to get started today. Um, the question is how to pay the bills. In Wyoming, I think all of us at some point in our lives go, how do we pay our own bills? And that's the topic for today, is how to pay the bills. So we're really fortunate to have several elected officials here, including legislators and state county commissioners and mayors and council people, and so I would like all of them to stand, please. I really appreciate what they do for us, and this nation was founded on a really unique principle, which is government of the people, by the people. And these people have, with a lot of sacrifice and a lot of time, have agreed to help us govern our great state. And that's why I appreciate them being here to listen to this very important topic about taxes and about fiscal responsibility. I also would like to thank our sponsors for this program, which really helped us put this all together. So we have Bo Sechrist of Black Hills Energy, Molly Lynn of Garland Light and Power, Rayanne Wolf of SBW and Associates, Mike Bailey of Wyoming Petroleum Marketing Association, and of course Northwest College for this great facility. You know, a lot of this wouldn't happen without all these people coming together, and the live streaming came from the Wyoming Petroleum Marketing Association agreed to live stream this program to others so that can't be here. So our PEP staff is really to be thanked for putting this together. We have a great group of people that are the staff, Christine and Rebecca, and they're here today, and just thank them because they're the ones that really put this together. And so I want to tell you a little bit about PAL Economic Partnership. We were founded in 2011, and some of the things that we really put together as a focus of what economic development should be and how we were going to approach it. We had one of our founding board members was a Microsoft executive, and what he said was, be careful when you hire and be careful when you plan that you don't go after the bright, shiny object. And I had never really thought about that, and he explained that to us, and he said, when you go after the bright, shiny object, you forget your goals, you forget all the parameters you set out about the kind of person you wanted to hire, the kind of programs you wanted to put in place, and you just go after that. And I see that sometimes in the state, I see that in other areas, and it's important that we remember the goals. So one of the other things that we really focused on is existing businesses. In economic development, it became very apparent through all of the national studies and everything that existing businesses are the businesses that are the key to your economic development. If you can get existing businesses to prosper and to bring in more employees and to bring in their friends, because they like working in your community and in your area, that they bring in other people, those are the ones that really will be the bedrock of your economic development efforts. And so we've always tried to say existing businesses are our core, and so one of the other things that we've come up with is, and this has been my thing forever, is relationships. You really accomplish more with relationships than any other single factor. When we get to know the people that serve us in our government, the people that are the heads of businesses, the people that across the state that can help us, and we can partner with them, then we can really get great results. And one of the other final things that we really come up with is the importance of gratitude. And we really constantly try to remember gratitude for our sponsors, gratitude for our investors, and most of all, gratitude for all the people in the state that work to make the state a much better place. So I would like you to join our staff, and Christine is going to introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And Kelly Spearing is my current board chair, and I have a few other PEP, Pal Economic Partnership board members in the room, and I just so appreciate this board and what it does. And I also actually want to call out by name Oscar Trevino behind the camera, Dustin Dix there, our tech people, Christy up here, and Leslie, our Northwest College, Rob Rumboltz and the students that you don't see here, they set it up yesterday for us. This conversation's about the people in the room here, but it's also about technology. So thank goodness for Northwest College support team. So thank you so much, guys. It's my pleasure today, really, to introduce our guests. And this conversation started in Cheyenne. I was with Dr. Chandler when 307 Health was winning their award at the Wyoming Business Alliance Governors Forum, and I heard this rockstar panel. And I looked around the room and I said, my gosh, my Park County businesses need to hear this. I grabbed Rennie right after and I said, Rennie, are you gonna come up to PAL? And he said, sure. I don't know about everybody else. And everybody else said yes. And then I said, Cindy, do you mind if I rip off your panel? Because it was awesome. And would you moderate it? So it really is a pleasure today. And then, to get a couple of our local legislators here, Senator Coe and Representative Larson, thank you. Key positions in the legislature representing, education and revenue, among other things. So to have that representation here is really special. So it really is my pleasure, and thank you so much for making the drive. While it was beautiful in Powell yesterday, apparently not so much in the middle of the state. So we can all appreciate that, but I really am thankful that you all made the drive. So with that, I also want to go ahead panelists and come up on the panel. And Cindy, I'm gonna just give a quick introduction to Cindy. You have the formal bios there, but I do wanna give a shout out. Pal Economic Partnership has been a member of the Wyoming Business Alliance for, gosh, at least 4 years, I think. And the reason we joined is the Wyoming Business Alliance does an excellent job advocating for you, businesses out there in Wyoming. And I really appreciate the professionalism that Cindy brings. The Governor's Forum, which is hosted in the fall in November in Cheyenne, is worth it. So I think I've been 4 out of the last 6 years, and I meet a lot of different people from around the state, different businesses. I connect with leadership, and it does sell out the last couple years now under Cindy's leadership. So I just highly recommend that you take a look at the Wyoming Business Alliance and what they do for you today. And this conversation's a great example of bringing information so that you as businesses and community leaders can make good decisions. But you can't make those decisions without the information. So Cindy, thank you so much. And thank you, panelists.
Thank you, everyone, and I really want to give a big shout out and thank you for giving me such a wonderful partner in Christine to work with. As she mentioned, this sort of percolated from some of the discussions that we had earlier, or I should say last year around the fall at our business forum. And when Christine approached me about continuing the conversation, of course my answer was yes. It's an absolute pleasure to work with Christine and to work with PEP and to have PEP as a member of the Business Alliance. And just wanted to take just a moment to talk about the work that the Alliance does. We are your statewide trade association for the private sector. We are down in Cheyenne advocating for you, and we've done so for over 30 years. So each year we have the pleasure of partnering with the governor on hosting the Governor's Business Forum. Governor Gordon is a fantastic partner. His team is fantastic to work with. I look forward to partnering him for future forums in the years ahead, and it's just really a wonderful time to use the forum for these types of discussions. What's emerging? What are our trends? How can we network? How can our voice be as strong as possible as businesses? Because it is business that's on the front line of generating the wealth that our state enjoys. And so by having the opportunity to network, to learn from each other, to stay current on relevant topics is really a wonderful benefit in addition to the program content that I hope you enjoy. So I'd like to personally invite all of you to join us November 18th through the 20th in Cheyenne at Little America. We're already planning for next year, so we hope to continue to deliver high quality, great events. So that's on the list. The next thing that I'd like to do as talking about our organization is I'd like to give a shout out to our leader. I'm so thankful to have our board chairman here today, all the way from the mean streets of Worland, Wyoming, Mr. Ernie Skredeberg. And I've learned so much from Ernie. Ernie has been a wonderful leader for our organization. He's been involved for many years and always does a terrific job. And one of the things that Ernie does that I would like to do today for him is Ernie always starts his meetings by saying thank you. And Ernie has a son named Andrew, and Andrew is deployed overseas with many of our other Wyoming sons and daughters. These are very, very tough times for our troops overseas. So I'd like Ernie, as well as any other military family members or retired military servicemen or women or first responders, to please stand up so we could say thank you. Thank you, Ernie, and to everyone else, and please let Andrew and his colleagues know that we're thinking about them all the time, and we look forward to their safe return. Okay, so having said that, I'd like to just turn the mic over to Rennie for a little bit so he can talk to us, make some opening comments about Power Wyoming. So thank you, Rennie.
Thank you, Cindy. I sure appreciate the opportunity to be here again. My name is Rennie McKay. I'm Governor Mark Gordon's policy director, and have been working on what is called Power Wyoming. And this is an initiative that the governor started very early in his term. He's now 1 year into his first term. And the idea was to, I think really at its core was to start a discussion like we're having here today. But it's to put information out there and to have a better sense as to what is happening and what we're going to have to deal with as a state. Unfortunately, there's some bad news, and I'll hit on that in a second. But really at the core, as I step back and look at it, and I was thinking about what we talk about today, or what I would bring up, is there's a lot of amazing things happening in Wyoming right now, and I just need to come here to Park County and hear the latest about what's going on in terms of growth in the community. Jobs, the excitement that's tangible in this room when you talk to people about things that are happening. It's really positive. Unemployment right now is down again from October to November. It went down. It's down over the year. If you look at 2019, the unemployment rate in Wyoming was under 4%, and that was the first year where we've had a full year. If we can stay under 4%, which I think we will, for the whole year, it'll be the first time in I think about 5 years that we've had an unemployment rate under 4 for the entire 12 months. Really positive. Our population grew in 2019. It's been on the decline the last few years, but it grew again in 2019. So there is optimism here, and you can see it when you come to a community like Powell, and that's really exciting. That said, there are some really big challenges. Mm-hmm. If you look at what's happened to the coal industry, down 35% in terms of production, and Dr. Godby's going to show you some more specific numbers on what that means across the economy. But 35% decline over the last decade, decline in coal production in Wyoming. Coal, bedrock of our state. It's the bedrock of the funding for services, for schools, all across Wyoming. So what happens over in the Powder River Basin does have an impact here. And unfortunately, the news does not get better. Dr. Godby and I email about this kind of thing as it happens. Just this month, in the last 30 days, again, another power plant that uses Powder River Basin coal, this one in Texas, announced an early closure. So we're really facing some big challenges. Natural gas production is going through the same kind of thing. Ultra Petroleum stopped production or stopped drilling just this year in the last few months, slowed production. So we're facing some serious headwinds. The governor's analogy has been that we have a fiscal storm ahead of us that we're facing right now because of the how much revenue we derive from the energy industry. So that's what kind of led to this idea of what's we call Power Wyoming, and what's at the core there, other than the dialogue we're having here, is that the more we know, the better decisions we're going to make. So that's why, I'm so happy to be here. Christine, thank you for having the idea that we could have this discussion here, and I just want to thank the panelists from Cheyenne who came and legislators who are going to sit up here and have a hard discussion with you this afternoon. There is a lot of great news happening in Wyoming right now, but if you look at what's happening with revenue, the picture is not pretty. So we have some hard things to talk about today, but there's also some great points of hope for us as well. But so Christine, again, thank you for starting this conversation so we can discuss what's going on, so you can see some of the information that the decision makers in Cheyenne are going to have to keep in their peripheral vision throughout the legislative session that starts on February 10th, that the governor has to keep always on his mind. But I think it's very important for all of you to know it as well, and so you can help influence. There's a lot of electeds here, as we saw. I really appreciate all of your service. We've got some tough decisions to make, and I think that this is the core of it, so we know what we're dealing with, and together we can, I think, chart the best path forward for Wyoming. So thank you for being here. That's a little introduction of what Power Wyoming is, and really looking forward to the entire discussion today.
Great, thank you, Rennie. All right, so again, I'm Cindy Delancey, and I'm going to walk us through the discussion today. And it's really appropriate to have this discussion right here in beautiful Park County, because when you look at your community, this community is just the poster child and exemplary of our economy. You have oil and gas and natural resources as a mainstream. We're in the heart of tourism country up here in beautiful Park County, and agriculture. Those have been traditionally the three economic drivers of our state. And as we move into a budget session, which is about to start February 10th, the governor and the legislature are tasked with the very difficult challenge of creating a budget that's going to be our guide and roadmap for the next 2 years. Now, there's some ability to perhaps supplement or adjust midway through, but really the heavy lifting is going to happen now. So just want to walk you through a little bit of the format of today. I want to say another shout out and thanks to the Petroleum Marketers Association. Thank you, Mark. I know you're out there watching, but thank you. This is a great example of just, again, that little change in maybe what we've done that can really have an impact. Thank you, Mark, for being so forward-looking and thinking about bringing technology as a way that we can touch an audience far and beyond what we have here in the room with us today. But as we set this next 2 year, we're looking at the fiscal year 21-22. So this is going to be a long time, and even years is when we have a budget session happening in Cheyenne. The session is going to last around 20 days. The legislature collectively has 60 days to have to conduct their business. So there's a little bit of flexibility based upon the workload. But this year, I think the plan is to maybe go a little bit beyond the 20 days. But things happen fast. They happen really fast. And I see the county commissioners out in the audience there, so they probably are going to figure out what I'm going to say. But if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. So please come be at the table with us to make sure that business's voice is as loud and as strong as it can be. And really, our elected officials enjoy hearing from you. You are on the front line. As I said in my opening remarks, you are the people generating the wealth. You have the expertise of what policy does. If the legislature does that, this is how it impacts me and my business. They really, really value your opinion as a citizen legislature, and they look to you to share your expertise. So come see us. We'll put you to work between me, Christine, and Ashley. I guarantee you will have a job. So we really need that help. But as Rennie said, there is some challenges. There's some headwinds facing us. The budget that is proposed is 8.7 approximately billion for the biennial. Those funds come from three sources: general fund, federal dollars, and what's considered other. Governor Gordon started us down a path of transparency when he served as our state treasurer. He's done a terrific job creating the Wyoming Sense website. It is very user-friendly, easy to understand. I encourage you all there to go take a look. It's a really nice step to try to start getting your arms around a very complex process, and I applaud him and his team for trying to boil this complex issue down to make it a little bit more manageable so we can engage. It's wyomingsense.com, and it's something we're taking a look at.
Sense with an S.
Yes, Wyoming Sense with an S. You're going to hear some big numbers today discussed, big numbers. And we're about looking at a $400 million structural deficit over the biennium. And the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, at their last update to the legislature in January, reported a $77 million adjustment, that the forecast is less money that we thought perhaps that the legislature was going to have to help us figure out how we're going to pay our bills. So as Mr. McKay said, and I'm not sure how to, oh, there we go. I love this picture. I look at it all the time because some days it feels like it's really not easy. But we all are here because we care about our state, we care about our future, we care about our kids, we care about our lifestyle. We are cowboys. And instead of being doom and gloom and thinking about, oh, you know, it's horrible because we have less money to spend, I challenge all of you. Think of this as a way to create opportunity and write our next chapter of Wyoming's history. The future is ours. We can do whatever we want. We're not beholden to anything. We have money in the bank. We have the opportunity to invest in ourselves. We have great leaders at the helm. I challenge you, figure out to help us write that next page instead of just, well, you know, boom and bust, that's all we know. We reject that. Our future is bright, and it is what we make of it. So that's really what we want to talk with you about today, is getting you the facts, getting you the information, so we can be at that table helping our leaders coming up with solutions that are going to work, not just for today, not just what we know, not just because that's the way we've done it. We have got to be tapping into that innovative spirit that has powered this state since its inception. We are the ultimate problem solvers. We don't want DC telling us what to do. We want to figure it out. We know how to solve problems. Well, here we go. We got some challenges ahead, and we've got some issues that we can conquer. And boy, I look forward to seeing what we come up with, because the future is extremely bright. So, having said that, let's hear from Ms. Harpstreet.
Okay, so my name's Ashley Harpstreet. I'm the new executive director for Wyoming Taxpayers Association. And I just thought we would start with a little tax humor. You can see, I love this quote, and I stole it from our former executive director, which is now the chief of staff, Buck McVeigh. But the art of taxation consists in so plucking the goose as to obtain the largest possible amount of feathers with the smallest possible amount of hissing. Don't you think that's correct, legislators? Okay. So just to get, break the ice. What is WTA, Wyoming Taxpayers Association, is a nonprofit 501c4 corporation. We are not anti-tax. We are a think tank for sound tax policy. Just to back up a little bit, I am Christine's counterpart. I was a former economic developer, and I was really interested in this role because sound tax policy is the baseline for good economic development. So do know that this warms my heart coming to this part of the state and being on the roadshow with this group and seeing what the state's out there doing, because it is so important. But our group is an efficient and effective government through research, education, outreach, and effective lobbyists. We're one of the oldest entities in the state. We were formed in 1937. I think it's important for everyone to know we have a diverse membership from the individual taxpayer to large corporations, and that when we weigh in on tax policy, it's a fair process. So we use the cornerstones of taxation, and I left some of the sheets if you're able to see them. We ask specific questions as legislation comes through, and we use it as a litmus test of what's sound tax policy for the state. And again, we think this is the foundation for economic development. Tax Reform 2000, I just am going to lay out a baseline of what these gentlemen are about to speak on. But there was a group in 1997, the former executive director of WTA, Michael Walden-Newman, wrote a draft bill for a special committee, and there's only 14 legislators that are still active that were part of this process, and I believe you were there, Senator. And they developed a Tax Reform 2000, so they had a bunch of different interest groups part of this. And Tax Reform 2000, it's 2020. Are we singing the same song?
Yep.
Okay. So 20 years ago and counting, this is some of the information that came out. Our tax structure lacks equity, stability, and balance, and you'll see that in our cornerstones. It's inequitable, it's unstable, it lacks balance, as we're highly reliant on extractive industries. And our primary tax sources, which I think is super important to take into consideration as they give you this forecast, is almost 75% of the state's tax revenue is generated by property tax, mineral severance taxes, and sales and use tax. As you consider what are major sources of revenue, you can look through all of these, and that's all pulling from the extractive industry. In the world of taxation, we have only 2 of the 3 legs, so we have sales and property, and there's no personal or corporate income tax. And I'm definitely not advocating for that, but I'm just making sure the group understands we only have 2 of the 3 stools of taxation. And I think you'll talk about a unicycle here soon. Right, okay, one of us will. Okay, and then property tax, it's just important to see the scale of how we tax property. Commercial residential at 9.5, industrial at 11.5, and then minerals and mining products are at 100%. And then just some tax facts, which it's a double-edged sword. You know, we rank as one of the highest in per capita in the state with local government revenue and expenditures, but yet we have no personal or corporate income tax and very low property taxes, which we all love that. And we are ranked lowest in nation in household tax burden. This is a chart that we like to use a lot, and this comes from the Department of Administration of Information and Economic Analysis, and this is the most updated numbers. But you can see that the personal tax collections, if you're taking for a family of 3 with an income of $60,000 and a home valued at $200,000, they're contributing about $3,180 for the public service cost of $27,050. So it's a hard sell, and I'm again not advocating disparity. This is just numbers that are out there with how our tax collection is accounted for personally for public service costs. The last slide I want to talk on, and then we can go to further proposed legislation, is breaking the pace. If you look at the general fund and reserve accounts with savings, and the senator probably knows this pretty well looking at it, where our revenue is outpacing, or the appropriations is outpacing our revenue, and we'll talk about what that forecast looks. Cindy hit the highlights on the Kreg Forecast, which is the consensus revenue estimating group, and the biennial budget that we're looking at ahead of us, $77 million in a general shortfall, $200 million in education shortfall, which, like Rennie contributed to the population growth. It's exciting to see 800 students adding to the forecast this year. And our flat budget made it through the governor's recommendations and joint appropriations, but it still is going to be a struggle as we look forward. So I'll stand for questions at the end. I do have upcoming proposed legislation that we can come back to. Christine? Okay. So I don't know.
Well, thank you. Before we transition our discussion to Dr. Godby next, I was negligent in reminding the audience that we will have time for question and answer. So we're going to reserve about 20 minutes at the end. So you'll see microphones around the room. Please feel free to engage in this conversation. We're here for you. We were honored to be able to come and enjoy, our time in Park County. So no question's a dumb question. Nothing's off the table with this group. Use your microphone, and we're happy to engage that. I also wanted to point out that the slides and presentations will be available on the Wyoming Business Alliance website as well as the PEP website after our presentation today. So we'll make sure to share if you want to take a closer look at some of the information today. So, okay, moving on. Dr. Godby, take it away.
Thank you. So I can't tell if people can hear or not. Hopefully you can. If you can't, just yell at me. People usually do. So Rennie mentioned some of the conversations that we have on a regular basis, and usually they go along the lines of, Rennie, this bad thing or this other bad thing happened. So I got an email from him this morning, and he said, it'd be really awesome if you were focused on the positive. So if we think that every challenge is an opportunity, we have an awesome opportunity ahead of us.
Yes, we do.
So you saw Ashley's remarks, and you'll see a little bit more about how we look at things. I'm going to just kind of take a broader perspective and look back at where we are. So this also comes from the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. It's dated, but you often hear this, right? That about half or more. You'll often hear as high as 70%. It's actually not been that high in quite a while. But over half of our revenues that we use for the general administration of public services and important other aspects of governance come from minerals in Wyoming, and 48% comes from everything else. So when Ashley said we only start with 2 legs of the stool, and those 2 legs consist basically of property taxes and sales taxes, and then a special category because we are so lucky with our mineral wealth. We've really focused on that. So while we have sales taxes, mineral severance, and property taxes, we don't lean on those equally, as you saw in the percentages that are used for the assessed valuation. Minerals are at 100%. Now, that doesn't mean they pay 100% of their value. There's a complicated formula that goes on after that. But the point is, we lean on them pretty heavily. And we've got to think about what's going on with our revenue base. So these are some numbers, and I use these at the WBA, and I chose 2015 only because, it's 2020, it's the end of the decade. Let's look at how we changed in a half decade. If we look at the coal, it goes from orange to red, caution to we're in big trouble. 21% decline in employment in 5 years, and as we know, that's been accelerating. Rennie mentioned a power plant. It wasn't actually a closure that, well, we've talked about a lot of these things. It was actually just a company deciding they're going to use their power plants much less that burn coal because there's cheaper ways to do things. And just this change will amount to about 30 less jobs in the coal industry. One announcement, one day, and that trickle keeps going. Rennie mentioned 35%. That was from our top to where we are now. Most of that's happened in the last 5 years, so 35, 28% has happened since 2015, and our severance taxes have been declining even more quickly. So that's coal. Natural gas, that's gotten all the attention, but natural gas declines are equally disturbing, and they're kind of going on silently. The price is down 9%. The production is down 11% in those 5 years. What we base our taxes on are the price times quantity, so it's basically double effects, having both price and quantity going down by approximately equal amount. And so you see that the natural gas severance tax decline is down 20%. So now we've got a 30% and 20% decline on the two of the 3 minerals that we depend on most. The good news is that oil has been really booming in this state, and it's been kind of a silent outcome unless you live in those areas. And a lot of people are unaware of this, that the oil projections are quite high. We've gone up 15% in production. The price increase has been very favorable. Of course, 2015, if you remember, was kind of the bottom of the current cycle when oil got down to about $30 a barrel or less when you're in Wyoming. And so our severance is up about 9%. But if you think about what that all means, we're leaning mostly on minerals, and this is the slide that Ashley was talking about. We had 3 minerals. Then we're down to 2, and really our revenue base is more and more depending on that oil. And of course, oil is the most volatile of those 3 commodities. We don't have to watch the news too often to see that. So that is our revenue base. And let me just say something very quickly about that's our tax dependence. And we kind of have a double curse, what I often call a double curse of minerals in Wyoming. The first is how dependent we are on them. So what this allows us to do is effectively tax other people for our public services. That's how you square the circle that Ashley mentioned, that we have highest per capita expenditures and the lowest per capita taxes. How we did that is we taxed other people. And we export most of that energy, and we charge taxes on it. So that's what we've done. It's become much more volatile, and the base is getting smaller. So if we were to think about what that looks like, and I know charts like this are not the most informative thing in the world, but really what you need to look at is this was kind of the 4 scenarios that we looked at. This is our mineral revenue, our revenue base that comes from minerals. So we total the total value of possible output in coal, gas, and oil, priced them, and we took 4 forecasts. 2 forecasts were kind of rosy, but they're almost certainly not going to come true. One was called the reference forecast, which is really what's happened in the past, doesn't catch current trends. The other is what would happen if oil and gas became suddenly much more scarce in the rest of the country. It's happened before. Those are the 2 lines that go up. The 2 that are most likely to happen and are really depressing us outside of coal and making things more challenging are the fact that we have loads of oil and gas in the country right now. We're now the largest producer of oil and gas in the world, which is a huge change in 10 years. And what that's done is it's flooded the markets and kept prices low and created a ton of competition. So the Kreg Forecast is the dotted line, and what that basically says is going into the next 2 years, we have a 5% decline in that revenue base that will extend in the next 2 years under our own Kreg projections, and I'm part of that group, to a 10% decline in those mineral revenues. Now, the reason it kind of bounces back and ends up at the end of the forecast period in 2025 only about 5% below where we start is because current projections for oil are that it will continue to increase in output, and that's been kind of the saving grace that we've had. Of course, that's 5 years out, and it's oil. Do you really want to put we could kick the can down the road, and this projection, as you'll see, says there's a gap, but we could be okay on the other end. But, the reason that we had a Tax Reform 2000 study 20 years ago was to talk about that revenue instability and the inequality it creates and the problems. And again, this time, it would be really challenging to do that. So what would that do? First of all, those downturns in coal and gas primarily, this is just state output, so that's jobs and output in the state. It's about a 3% decline, accepting everything else. So we've got a lot of positive things going on, which means the decline won't be quite this big, but it's a 3% decline in output, regardless of whether you take either of the 2 most realistic scenarios, given current outcomes. If you look at our state budget, though, before possibly oil, if everything went well for the next 6 years, and if just look back 6 years ago or 5 years ago to what oil looked like, would we be predicting where we are today? Probably exactly the opposite, right? So what this says is the numbers are hard to read, but it's about a 6% decline. The blue line is our revenues, and some of our expenditures follow that. So for example, as people start to leave the state, as it gets more challenging, we'll have lower expenditures. That's the orange line. The black line is 0. So the point is that gap gets bigger and bigger. And if we look at that gap for the next 5 years, you've already heard the word 400 million as an amount. If we go into the next biennium, the estimates are that we'll have a total deficit of closer to $1 billion in either of these scenarios. And so this is when we say we have a structural deficit, this is what we mean. We mean that our current taxation and revenue system will not be able to support our current level of public services. So we have tough choices. And again, that leads to the opportunity. And so this is what we've been looking at, and it's going to require a real discussion in the state to talk about our values. Now, the last thing I'll just mention is that you've heard a lot about economic diversification as a possible savior here. And there was a study last year that looked at our current revenue system and how it works. And unfortunately, because we only tax minerals, if we were to bring any other major sector into this state, let's say that we had the great fortune of moving Silicon Valley lock, stock, and barrel to the center of Wyoming. And why wouldn't they come here? It would be great, right? We'd have all that economic opportunity. Unfortunately, it would bankrupt us because we don't tax any of those sectors. And so we would have all that extra public service that was necessary. It would be great for the private economy, but we don't tax those. We don't tax ourselves effectively. And so that's the challenge that we face, is we're going to have to think about what is really important to us. And so that's it's not a negative, it's a positive conversation. What we really need to talk about is what is it that we like best or love most about Wyoming? What is it that makes Wyoming a special place? As I drove into Powell this morning, you know, it was easy to be reminded of why we live here. Senator Coe, I think, sent an email last night, welcome to the Bighorn Basin. And it is a privilege to be here. You're in this beautiful building. We have facilities here, we can attract people, we can be a success. Success is not only dependent on having low taxes, but of course we all prefer that to more taxes. So we have to think about what is it that we really cherish? What are those things that are most important? How much do they cost? And then what are we willing to do to pay for them? And that's a positive. It sounds challenging, but it's a positive conversation because that's the conversation we need to have. It should be about what is it that we are facing change. There's nothing we can do about that. But what is it 50 years from now that we want to make sure is still here and that is here because of the decisions that we make today? And that's, you know, a great opportunity. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Cindy. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Godbee. Before we go on to Rennie, you know, I think that to put a finer point on this conversation, you know, I'd really encourage you to think about some of the points that Dr. Godbee just made to us. You know, self-reflection is a good thing. We are at the crossroads of self-reflection and as we look towards the future. And it's really incumbent upon the business community to help our elected officials and policymakers find solution. It's easy to say no. It's hard to say, let's do this. We have such bright, capable minds available to us in the business community. You can see that we have some real issues that we've got to get our arms around. Let's be that thought leader. Let's be that idea factory for our elected officials to help them and give them concrete solutions that are real to move us forward. So with that, I think we'll hear a little bit more about some of the work that Governor Gordon and Power Wyoming is thinking about in context of this conversation. Thank you, Rennie.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Again, I just want to say how much I appreciate that you're all here for this discussion and that, you know, Cindy catalyzed the discussion. It's something, you know, we can have analyses and closed-door conversations to look at this kind of information with experts like Dr. Godbee and others, but to bring it out is something that, you know, Cindy saw that opportunity as I talked to her about what the governor was trying to do, and so I really appreciate that you brought this to the Business Alliance. And, you know, I will just point out the obvious. When Dr. Godbee talks about this and looks at $1 billion deficit, and then I'm sitting next to a person who works for what's called the Taxpayers Association, we're not here to just tell you that we're going to be trying to pass taxes. That's the agenda. The idea, and I think what we've tried to put together in these conversations is, let's at least have the facts about what our tax structure does and how it generates money, not to say, is that the answer? It's just so that we make the right decisions going forward. Because, you know, there is $1.5 billion right now sitting in the rainy day account. We have already spent, I believe it is $600 million over the last 5 years out of savings. Most of that on education, most of that was an account that was set up for education. It's empty now. There is the rainy day account, the LSRA, the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account, that's sitting there with $1.5 billion in it right now. It looks like it'll have $1.3 billion after this biennium again, because we need to spend another $200 million on education this next 2 years. So, you know, those are the facts, and that's what we just need to talk about and bring this all out. What Dr. Godbee just went through and those scenarios that he brought out, what the goal of this was not to have an academic put their lens on things. The numbers he gave you are from the federal government, and they're widely viewed as being the most objective analysis of where energy production is going into the future, and then we overlaid that with revenues. So that is not taking into account, do we want to try to start tilting those lines? And I think that's the discussion that we need to start looking at and having is okay, that's if we do nothing. That's the outcome in our future if we do nothing. we can start impacting how those lines move. And we do have time right now. We can get through the next 2 years. In this budget, we have the governor proposed and the legislature is supporting right now a flat budget. There are increases in education. And I think we're all proud to have a really well-funded education system in Wyoming. There's a lot of questions, though, about how can we get more out of that education system, because I think we all aspire to have not just the best funded or one of the best funded educational systems, but our aspiration is to have the best performing students and to create the best future for our kids, right? My kids are in elementary school right now. That's what I dream about. You know, is my biggest hope is that we're going to send them into the world as, you know, talented and prepared as they possibly can be, so they can take care of all the problems and opportunities that are that are sitting there for them. But so, you know, again, just really appreciate kind of diving into this discussion. I'm going to hit a few more pictures for you and a few more points about what's going on. So, you know, I think as Power Wyoming got launched, this is what the governor had to say about it, and I think it really is true. So we just need to know, and we can't put our heads in the sand about what's happening in the energy industry and how that impacts us. And so it's at the core of his strategy for how we look at the energy industry is we got to preserve the markets that we have. And so we got to fight to make sure that coal is still used, because it is an important part of our economy and the nation's economy. But that doesn't mean that we may not need to look at some other things to lower the carbon emissions from coal. And in fact, we have to. So that's another part of that is all right, how can we even create new markets for the fossil fuels? And a big part of that is looking at low carbon options for fossil fuels. We can't get there as a globe on the backs of renewables. We're going to have to solve some things. You look at what the Paris climate, the Madrid climate, they all talk about carbon capture. So we, I think, have an opportunity to lead there, because there is a gap in terms of leadership in the world on carbon capture. Some of the most cutting edge efforts on energy right now are happening in Wyoming at the School of Energy Resources, and kind of launched because of Wyoming. So there's exciting things happening. We're going to be able to be part of this, and I think it's one of the great opportunities that we have is to innovate and to be at the front edge of where the world goes. So first round of analysis, Dr. Gabi already kind of hit on this, but if you take it to the next stage, there's also a decline in jobs. So this isn't just an issue, because we hear about this all the time, right? Is that Dr. Gabi said 30 jobs. Those are 30 Wyoming jobs are impacted by that one planned reduction in coal-fired power in Texas. So these things really matter to people in Wyoming and their families, let alone to the funding of the schools here in Park County. So it's something we all have to think about. Just to dive in, it's a little small if you can't see it up there, but essentially this pie chart gets at what the difference between what Dr. Gabi said, about 50% comes from minerals, and that Ms. Herbstreit said about 75%. If you look at this, the property taxes and sales taxes and investment income, a lot of that is actually attributed to the mineral industry, so it's not the direct income. We are about 50% directly for minerals. Indirectly, you also get to a much higher amount. But this is how we pay the bills now, I guess, would be the answer, as you were paid to get here and have the question answered. This is how we pay our bills now. This is another slide you've already kind of seen. I'm going to repeat a few things, but I think they're worth repeating. This shows you the green is the general fund and the blue is education. So you can kind of get a sense as to where your money is going right now. But unfortunately, the revenue is the red line, so it's under. And that's how we got to a situation where we spent $600 million out of savings over the last 5 years. So this is what we're facing. Do we want to, how do we want to curtail those lines? You can see there have been reductions in government already. So this isn't something that we're anybody is just putting their heads in the sand and saying we don't have a problem. People are actively doing it. There are changes happening in state government, and I know they're happening in county government and city government up here too. You saw this one already. It's just worth repeating. You know, there's a lot of people that don't understand how little as individuals we pay and how much we get in return. So do we want to change that and have more of that say in our government, or is it more squawking by the goose? You know, there's a big discussion to be had on that front. And I just wanted to show you, here's some property tax and where we get our property tax. So it gives you another indication how much minerals pays. Green is minerals, and it has shrunk. And residential property taxes is orange. It's gone up over the last decade to be a larger source of property tax revenue. But you know, maybe this is just things that Dr. Gabi and I geek out on, but I hope you're interested. So, you know, why do we have to care about more than what's going on in Park County? Why do we have to care about what's going on in Wyoming? This, I'm going to take you into a little bit of kind of the energy policy issue, because I think if we want to bend those revenue lines and have less of a deficit in our future, we need to think about some policy issues because other people are bending our lines for us, unfortunately. So here's what's happening. This is how electric generation in the U.S. has changed over time and what's happening. It is fascinating, scary, and impactful to understand that the economists and the utilities, definitely driven through a federal tax incentive, the cost of renewable energy crossed the line in the last couple years. I don't know exactly when it happened, Rob, you looked at it, but it crossed. So the cost of producing a megawatt from wind and solar crossed the line on coal in the last 2 years. It's, you know, we have prided ourselves, and I wrote press releases and communications for Governor Meade. For the first 4 years of his term, when we talked about coal and policy, we would say, how can you attack coal? It is the most affordable and most stable source of electricity in the nation. With that tax incentive especially, that changed. You can't say it's the most affordable any longer. You can say it's the most reliable, and there is a cost to a loss of reliability. But in terms of making choices as a utility, there is space for them to make choices where they can scale back how much coal they use, as Excel is doing in Texas, and put wind on their grid. And they are doing that in Texas at an alarming rate. So huge thing to think about this graph and where it goes into the future. And then we export so much of our energy. We export more energy to the rest of the country than Texas does. And people don't think about that, of how dependent we are on other states and their policies. We've had trouble, you know, we talk about a war on coal that was coming from the federal government. Well, this is what states are doing right now in terms of policies for how they want to get their electricity into the future. So this isn't just a DC-driven issue. Other states are making these choices, and actually some of these have changed since this map was put together. Colorado would be greener because they now have a stronger goal, and other states have been added to this list as well. So we have other states' policies that are going to change how electricity is used and produced, and that impacts us because we export so much. So we really need to think about this and look at those policies and consider them and think about what policies we want to put in place so we can change the future. So the other thing that I just wanted to point out is that this isn't just states. Companies are making these same decisions. This is just one page of a whole list of what different corporations have put into place for carbon goals into their future. Microsoft just heard that they want to remove every particle of carbon dioxide they've ever emitted as a company by the year 2030, I believe. So, you know, this isn't just a federal policy. This isn't just a state policy issue. This is where the marketplace is taking us as well. Shell was one of the companies on this list, and they have left just being a fossil fuel company. They are now an energy company, and they're looking at how many ways they can produce energy, and all their goals point towards being zero carbon. This is a fossil company that's now trying to be a zero carbon company, which is, I think, part of the optimism and opportunity for us, right? It doesn't have to be, and this is what Governor Gordon says over and over again, we can't have a fight globally and solve this if we're going to say fossil fuels are bad and renewables are good. Fossil fuel companies, fossil fuels that are so important to Wyoming are part of the solution. We're just trying to get carbon out of the atmosphere, right? Is what the globe and the marketplace is moving towards. So let's get carbon out of the atmosphere, and fossil fuels can be part of that solution. Shell knows it. What do they know that we don't know? Nothing. We're going to be part of the solution. There's also going to be way more private money coming into places like Wyoming because we're already leaders in this field, so we can drive this even further. And that's it for my slides. But again, I just want to say there are a ton of great opportunities for us out there as a state, and there's a lot of great things happening in Wyoming. So don't leave here feeling down about things. Just know that we do have to make some hard choices, but hard choices, challenges lead to opportunities. We in Wyoming have chosen to get on bucking horses and bucking bulls for many, many decades, and that wasn't because we thought it was going to be easy and fun.
That's right. Thank you, Rennie. Before we go to our elected officials, I just kind of want to reiterate the takeaway from, a lot of Rennie's comments that keeps the tape playing in my mind. And being a parent myself too, like Rennie, I want, we all want best opportunity for education for that next generation. But as business, we are the end users of our education system. And the time is right, in some of these ways to create these opportunities to implement efficiencies, modernization strategy, and technology. These are some of the solutions that I'm talking about and how we can help be more productive in those services that we deliver. So it's exciting to know that there seems to be a lot of traction on maybe taking a look at modernizing our education delivery system, and being that business community, the end user of that system. I assure you that I am going to be at the table making sure that these conversations, that there's a frame and some expertise coming as what the needs of that end user community, being business and industry, is. This notion of that we're using our savings to cover our operating expenses is not sustainable. I really, really want you all to think about those graphs. Like using our rainy day fund and the savings that we've been so blessed to create through the smart choices from our legislature over the years to get us to the point where we have, 1.5, 1.8 billion, accessible to us is remarkable. They have been such good stewards of our resources. But think about it even in your own home budget. Using your savings to cover those ongoing expenses, like maybe your mortgage payment, that's not a strategy for success. And we know that in business. Those savings are for those one-time sort of incidental, oh my gosh, my transmission blew up, I don't have that money maybe in my operating budget, we cover this, we move on, we go back to normal to live within those means. So, tough road ahead, interesting discussions I predict will be in the future, and we are so blessed to have such talent and expertise to kind of react and help us from, an elected official standpoint, discuss with us. Representative Larson serves on the Revenue Committee. Senator Coe has been the chairman of the Education Committee in the Senate and has been, just a pillar of leadership for decades. And so really looking forward to hearing from our elected officials on how they envision the conversation going forward. So Senator Coe, why don't we start with you as a senior member of our panel, and please share some comments with us.
So I've been a what for decades?
Pillar of leadership.
Well, thank you. I'm going to be a little different today because we've heard the experts here talk, and I'm going to be more of a messenger because it says, how are we going to pay our bills? And so just a little background. I've been chairing Senate Education since 2003, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to co-chair Joint Education with my good friend Representative David Northrup, and we've done a lot of stuff together. Congratulations, David, on all the work that you've done over the years with education. I'm a member of Joint Minerals. As said, decades. I'm completing 31 years in the state senate, and one of the other things I do is I chair the Select Air Transportation Committee, and I'm currently the president of Cody Yellowstone Air, which is our local air service group. I see some of our members that participate. I see James Klessens here with Forward Cody, Joe Tilden, Park County Commissioner Joe Tilden, Mayor Matt Hall from Cody, and of course Christine back there. She participated.
Can we
You
have
can't?
Perfect, great.
Larry, do you want to borrow my hearing aids? Is that better? So anyway, I'm going to talk just very briefly about air service because, how are we going to pay the bills in the future? And I can tell you that I think that air transportation and good transportation is significantly important for the future of economic development, attracting new business. And I'm going to blow our horn just a little bit over in Cody, at Cody Yellowstone Airport. 2004, total employments for 42,000. 2013, 60,000. This is coming and going. 2019, all-time record, 82,000. So we had the biggest month we've ever had, as James can tell you, over 12,000 total employments in July. But it's also interesting that at the state level, we stepped up and realized the significance and importance of air transportation in the Endow Initiative. And the number 2 priority was air transportation. To grow a small rural state like Wyoming, you got to have good transportation. And the bottom line is, if you aren't willing to partner up with the airlines, they'll take their airplanes and go some other place. And so we passed what we call the Aeronautics Commission recommended, and we passed capacity purchase agreements. I was in the Denver airport Saturday night, which I don't like very much, and there's Sheridan on the board, and there's Riverton on the board that just started back up critical need airports. Now I'm going to talk about something that's not quite so pleasant. I'm going to talk about K-12. K-12 is in fact, and you heard the experts, you heard Rennie and Dr. Godby talk about it. It's the 800-pound gorilla in the room as it affects overall state projections for revenue. You heard them say we've got a $200 million a year shortfall. Actually, if you look at that, in this year it's $176 million. In the next biennium, it's projected at $396 million. In 2017 and 2018, we depleted entirely the Common School Permanent Land Fund Reserve account to fund the shortfall in education. And David, I think that was $654 million. Roughly, now remember that the school foundation program and K-12 is funded differently than the general fund. Between 50 and 60% of how schools are funded through the school foundation program comes from local ad valorem taxes. And as you see the downturn in minerals, and you see the downturn in the price of natural gas, and you see the oil's doing quite well. But local assessed valuation downturn, I don't have to tell Commissioner Livingston or Commissioner Tilden or Commissioner Fulkerson about what local assessed valuation has done, the shortfall that you have. Yesterday, for example, West Texas Intermediate Oil, $52.70. Henry Hub, natural gas, $1.92. This all comes back to the school foundation program because local assessed valuation through local ad valorem helps create the majority of the money that helps fund the school foundation program. This year we're considering, and the Joint Education Committee and Joint Appropriations Committee recommended a $19 million a year ECA adjustment, external cost adjustment. So we'll debate that. There's pros and cons to it, but here's some of the spending that's taken place and a little history of the school foundation program. 2001, 2002, $644 million a year. $7,203 per student. 2011 and 2012 after 2010 recalibration. 1.34 billion, 14,557 per student. 2019 and 20, 1.54 billion, $16,043 per student. In the middle of all this, the state, since 2004 on school capital construction, has spent $3.4 billion building schools. Now you say, why are you building schools? Well, we had a landmark decision, one of the 4 Campbell decisions, in 2002 that said building schools will no longer be a function of local wealth, it'll be a function of state wealth. And since then, mostly through co-lease bonus payments, we've funded school CapCon. Well, folks, let me tell you something. Co-lease bonus payments are gone for all intents and purposes. So we'll enter into this next interim. Christine, quickly. Yeah, you've told me that before. Real quick, I want to talk about, we're talking about how to pay in the future. I want to talk about the lodging tax that nobody's heard much about because it was just brought out and it's going to be sponsored by the Joint Appropriations Committee. They've agreed to sponsor that as an interim, as a committee bill, very similar to last year. What this really does, though, it expands our tax base because it basically frees up $26 million a year from the general fund. And so with that, I won't, Christine, I'll cut her off. That's probably too much, as I can tell you're going.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Larson, any words before we get to questions from the audience?
Being the last one, I could be really short, but it's an honor to be here, up here with our presenters. I appreciate them traveling so far. I know we want to get to questions. I guess I want to make sure everybody doesn't leave here pessimistic, that we need to be on the optimistic side. Our nation as a whole is doing great, and I've always heard that Wyoming lags behind. So let's hope that that is going to happen here. I definitely want to say that I don't think increasing taxes is the way to go, but I know there'll be a big discussion on that, and so we have to, how we're going to do it. One thing I do know, there's some articles written in rich states, poor states. There's many probably don't want to look at that sort of thing. Art Laffer and Jonathan Williams published that. Wyoming was in the top 10 of the states in the nation in economic outlook, and we've dropped to the 11th place. We were 8th, but a lot of it has to do with just talking about taxes. Taxes keep businesses away. We've got to be careful. And so in revenue, we got 16 bills we're bringing. They're not all taxes, but a good majority of them are wanting to raise your taxes. So there'll be a big discussion on all that. Hopefully we can get some coal exports. Maybe we can get a port open. I think that would be a way big benefit. Get some coal to Japan or China or wherever. But I think we should be very careful.
Thank you for that. So we have some questions already prepared for the panel, but knowing that we have about 20 minutes left, I think we're going to go ahead and open it up to your questions first, and then if we have time after your questions are all successfully answered, then we'll come back and jump back to the panel questions that we were planning on speaking with. So who has a question after hearing all of that? I'm sure there's someone that does. Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
What's interesting is, looked at all those graphs and all that stuff, I still haven't seen anything about cuts. And I would really like to see some serious discussions made in what kind of cuts and how would they affect us as citizens of the state. Would our roads go to pieces? Would our schools be a disaster? How can we change that $8,000 per person with state services? I've never seen that where we can adjust the expenditures versus just the revenue. It's a reality the revenue's going down. We better get ready for the revenue to go down. But every individual person in this room, when our revenue goes down, we cut expenses. Thank you.
Representative Larson wants to
I
start
think
with
I'll
that one.
jump on that one. In the rich states, poor states publication, Wyoming is 50th in the number of governmental employees per 10,000. We have 870. The closest is Alaska at 710, and Montana is in the 600s, I think. So, you know, you sure don't want to lose government jobs, but maybe that is a way to get some efficiency there. I think there's agencies that can find some efficiencies also. So I hope we look at that.
I'll just add to it, you know, Governor Gordon's position is that, and I think it's clear, you can't have this discussion without the people of Wyoming recognizing we've got to make sure we've made every cut we can before we come and ask for a tax on all of you. You know, a lodging tax, the users of that largely are supportive of it, and I think that's why there is support right now for a lodging tax. But I think there are going to be a lot of discussions. The governor talks a lot about how with roads, the new director of Department of Transportation is recognizing that there are going to be some dirt roads. You know, is the potential that is down the road, because we've got to put the money towards our mainstream highways for safety and for the economy. So, you know, that we are going to make some of those choices. And if you go to that website, Wyoming Sense, you can get a lot better information about where your money goes now and what it would mean to cut them. So you understand what services we're talking about when we're talking about making a cut to the Department of Health, for instance.
Anyone else want to chime in? Senator Coe.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. You know, just a comment too, and I don't know if Randy's got access to these numbers, but my understanding is that over the last 10 years, we've probably taken 600 to 800 million out of government spending, state government spending, and over 450 employees. Mm-hmm. And I will say that as it relates to K-12 over the last 5 years, I think our total reductions have been somewhere in the $110 million range. Is that about right, David? So we have tried to right size in a lot of areas.
I'd just add a little bit to that. So you heard the numbers about, you know, we're dead last in number of employees per person. In other words, we have more than anybody else. And then Alaska and Montana, there's a pattern there. There's economies of scale to government, and those are the smallest states. The projections we've done so far are just looking at where we are now if we remain budgeting approximately as we do, and where our revenues go. The choice is obvious in one sense, which is, can we talk about cuts? But that needs to be, I think, that's a really tough discussion. As you've already heard, 4 years ago, we went through a significant round of cuts. And at a certain point, we have to ask ourselves and make sure that we know that we are providing the public services that people want. In many cases, people will pay more when they know what they're losing. And so an important part of the next round, to your point, is exactly that, to show people exactly what they get for their funds. But the first one was to say, where we are is unsustainable, because there has been a bit of misinformation over time, or maybe just people don't realize it, where they think, you know, we can survive this. And I did show you a gap that goes away. The problem is that gap ends up spending all of our savings if we don't make a change. And then secondly, the gap goes away. That entirely depends on oil kind of saving the day. And those are probably two things that we probably really don't want to depend on.
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. And before we move on, I feel like I'm compelled to chime in a little bit. I had the privilege of being a legislative appointee to the Government Efficiency Commission. It was a tremendous honor to be a member of the business community at the table. It was a 2-year, maybe 3-year process that was started by Governor Meade, carried over by Governor Gordon, to take a look at exactly what you're saying. You know, like, what can we do to maximize the investments that we're making? It was quite eye-opening to me. And this is where, you know, we're talking about this need for action. If we don't act, that's our future. It's predetermined. Those graphs, those numbers, those painful things to hear, that's our future. So we go through this process, we have consultants come up with ideas, and then the ideas are brought forward, and we hear things. I know Chairman Northrup is right at the front line of this. We can't do this. It's too hard, too much paperwork. You know, so like we have to shift this mindset when solutions are brought forward to say, well, we don't like that. You know, like what is it that we want on that table that we all need to be part of so we're not on the menu? This notion of a cultural shift to kind of be forward-looking and thinking about maybe taking some approaches to adopting efficiencies, which the government efficiency report is on the LSO website, there for the reading. It's really got some interesting creative ideas that unfortunately there's been pushback to. Just finding those solutions is really what we need to do. We need to act because we see what happens if we don't act. So, next question. Commissioner.
Yeah, well, it's kind of a statement and a question at the end. But I mean, Park County is going through exactly what the state is going through. And it really caught us this year. We ended up with we had to transfer $1.2 million out of reserves in order to balance the budget and maintain the services that we have. And I spent the last 4 months heading a budget committee at the county, and we've analyzed the budget every which way you can. And the bottom line is that our revenues over the last 10 years have remained very stable and flat. And our expenses have continued to rise. The only good news was that our expenses rose less than inflation, which I personally am very proud of. And so we're to the point now, and I've never been an advocate of taxes. In 2012, there was a general purpose tax on the ballot. I didn't oppose it, but I certainly didn't support it. And so Park County right now, we're trying to get ahead of the curve and be proactive as far as our budget and our revenue stream is concerned. And I hope, if I have anything to say about it, we're going to put a 1 cent general purpose tax, fifth penny, on the ballot this fall. And I sincerely hope the taxpayers will pay for it and vote for it, because if they don't, we're going to have to cut services, and that's just all it amounts to. In Park County, when I first became a commissioner, oil and gas paid 65% of our taxes. Today, that's down to 35%. And, you know, as been pointed out by members of the panel, that's not looking very rosy in the future. So I guess my question, primarily directed to the two legislative representatives up there, is it's time for the legislature to become proactive and try and get over the curve, up and ahead of the curve. And my fear is, with all the savings that you have down there, that all of a sudden Wyoming's going to wake up one morning, they're ready to fall off the cliff, and you haven't done anything about it. Would you like to respond?
You aren't putting me on the spot, are you, Joe? No. Well, we've chosen in the past to do a one-time distribution, and it's been $105 million in the last couple of years to cities, towns, and counties. I know that probably doesn't solve all your local problems, but I want to emphasize that that's a discretionary expenditure the legislature chooses to make. You know, one year it was as high as $360 million to cities, towns, and counties based on a formula. When we had I don't know if you guys remember the natural gas surplus that one year, it was a couple $billion bucks. But I want you to know that I think there is so much respect in the legislature for local government, you know, at the local level, that I think the legislature is receptive to trying to explore ways in particular that cities, like the municipal option tax, or counties can help themselves to, if we've got to pass legislation to do that. The $105 million that we distribute every year, that we have the last couple of years to cities, towns, and counties, comes out of the LSRA. That's our rainy day fund. So that's not a future answer for the problems that you have at here. So I don't know if Dan has anything to add.
You know, and we fight hard for that every year down there in Cheyenne. But for Park County, after the Madden Matrix was put in, which is a new formula for distribution, We lost $190,000 in Park County, so we only get about $340,000 a year at the county from that $105 million. And I guess my question is, and I know Representative Larson is in opposition to taxes, and I always have been too, but at some point in time, to me, the people of Wyoming have to start paying the bill. That's just all it amounts to. Or they're going to start losing services. The state's cut for the last 5 or 6 years anyway. Park County's cut 12% in the last 5 years. And so we're down to the point where we're going to start cutting services. And I would hate to see the state go too deep into cuts. I mean, you're cutting the Department of Health. We have a big problem with mental health issues in the state, Title 25 and all of that. So I guess the question I'm asking, are you in a position to try and be proactive as far as new taxes and maybe be innovative and think out of the paradigm, come up with some new ways to raise revenue at the state level?
Sounds to me like a good question for Representative Larson, who's on the Revenue Committee.
Representative Larson, do you want me to pull up the current legislation that's up?
Oh, I think I have them. There is the optional municipality tax that is coming up into the revenue. It probably has a good chance of passing, I would guess. The House for sure. And it sounds like the Senate's probably open to discuss that too. You know, that gives it to the voters. I would have a couple amendments that I'd like to add. I think the voters need, I'd be worried that it's a permanent one. The way the bill sits now, I think once it's voted in permanent as a general for the county, you would have to ask. I don't know if the commissioners have to ask it or if the public has to ask it to have a vote if they still want it. So I'd be worried about that. I think it should come up every 4 years. Let the people see how the money's being spent. If they approve of the way it's going, then that'd be fine. I definitely lean more toward a specific tax. If you have bridges or such that you want to say it's going to bridges, people are definitely a lot more open to that. They're obviously worried it's going to go to new pickups or new whatever, more wages and more employees. They want to know where the tax is going. So I would encourage being a specific tax and go that route. When it gets paid off, go ask for another one.
Thank you. Next question. Do we have any higher education folks that want to talk about the role of higher education? We've talked a little bit about K-12. Anything from higher ed? Okay. Well, I think we'll just launch right into our questions in the time that we have left. Oh, we do have one. Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I represent Northwest College. I've been on the Board of Trustees here for 14 years. I have seen our revenues diminish year by year by year by year, and we are several years already into cuts that are deep enough to draw blood. We are having students come up to the board meetings and saying, what happened to our health program? We don't have a school nurse anymore. We have to go downtown and find a doctor. And they're bringing up things. Our fitness program is gone. There are things that bring students to our schools and our colleges. And it's long past the time. I'm old enough to look around and think I'm probably the oldest one here. But I taught school for 40 years. And I've been on this board for 14. And what I see as an erosion of what we were able to offer. I noticed that 2 of you have young students in K-12. K-12, we are trying to prepare students for today's world. When I started school, a student went to school in elementary and you had a red chief notebook, you had 2 pencils, and you had a box of crayons. 8 crayons was all that was necessary. And we had a teacher. We had no teacher's aide. We had a couple of books. And basically, that would not prepare any of our young people for what the jobs are today. We have to have the equipment. We have to have the staff that can prepare our young people to step out of our doors and be able to say, hello world, I am ready. I am well trained. But somebody has to pay for this, and I go along with Tilden, you know, we have always asked our sugar daddy to pay for everything we have. Well, our sugar daddy has gotten pretty small lately, and it's time that maybe we start calling our taxes user fees, and maybe that would go over better, because every one of us uses what our tax money provides in this state. And yes, I've been very happy to live in a state where taxes are quite low. I've also been a long-time farmer's wife. I was our bookkeeper and our accountant, and because I taught, I was our cash flow and our insurance so we could stay farming. You know, we need to be able to look at ourselves, and if we all chip in, it won't be that bad.
Thank you. Any other legislators in the office that, or in the audience that would maybe like to chime in? Well, I'm going to offer a response before I open it up to the panel. I think, you know, that was really well said, and I think the flip side to that, speaking on behalf of the business community, is it's essential that we have students that are prepared for a modern-day workforce. And when you hear feedback from businesses looking at coming to Wyoming, this is a concern. And so, you know, this conversation about how do we modernize, how do we have an education system at the K-12 level that is coordinated with our higher learning, to have that continuum of learning to make sure that we're able to provide the workforce that businesses are going to look at when they're assessing as to whether or not to come to Wyoming is part of this equation and discussion that needs to be addressed. So thank you for raising that point. Panelists, any other response? Rennie.
Sure. You know, I think people may know this, but Dr. Hickswa is down having lunch with Governor Gordon right now with the other college presidents and UW's interim president. You know, because it is such an important discussion. And I think to the question about cuts, too, is that I think you saw it on the graph. We have made cuts to government. And this is the challenge we're in, is that Governor Gordon had the proposal brought to him by the colleges to add $30 million to the community college budget and also $30 million to the University of Wyoming's budget. Both of them made good cases for how they need more money right now to keep up with other states around us. Students are paying more in tuition now. That's gone up markedly over the last few years, and there's a need for it. But the governor had to turn it down. There is no money for ongoing additions to things like colleges, to the University of Wyoming, things we really all care about, right? So these are the hard choices we have to make. Another example, there's a proposal for almost $25 million to meet the rising cost of long-term health care for elderly. So I think all of us, well, we've got kids in K-12, we've got grandparents or parents who are facing those long-term health care issues. That cost is going up, we can't afford it. The governor had to turn that down. And that isn't a new program. That's to keep up with the cost of the existing program. The other one that was built into that same one is for mental health care, long-term residential care. He had to turn that down. So, you know, we're making hard choices right now. Another one, the suicide prevention hotline. There's a $1 million proposal. Wyoming's the only state in the country that doesn't have its own suicide hotline, prevention hotline. Only state in the whole country that doesn't have that. And we can't afford it. The governor, fortunately, the revenue outlook came in a little better. So the governor's proposed in JAC, the Appropriations Committee took a very bare bones idea to establish the first ever suicide hotline in Wyoming, but it won't be able to run not even more than 8 hours a day and not on weekends. Or we'll have to maybe potentially run it on weekends, but it can't run every day, every hour, and that's a suicide hotline. And I think we can all acknowledge we have a crisis with suicide in Wyoming, but those are the hard choices we're having to make right now. And so, you know, I think we're all in this together, and I think we all care about our future. This is an amazing place to be to discuss this, and I hope that we're going to come out of this with some great solutions. But this is a hard time right now. We don't have the money. We don't have the $1 billion surplus that was here just 10 years ago. So thank you for my position, for being here to have this discussion, to hear about this, because I know it's not easy. I didn't
That's
like
step
driving
one.
across the state to come here and say, deliver some bad news.
Senator Coe.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. I just wanted to respond to Carolyn a little bit. You know, some of the things that we've done, you know, I worry about our young people being prepared for the future, and there's three things that come to mind that the legislature's done with that. The first is we've made CTE, Career Tech, a bigger player in the Hathaway scholarship. We've taken, and of course this last year applied the applied baccalaureate degrees for the benefit of community colleges to offer. But the big thing that I think we've done for the benefit of our young people as they move into the future is the computer science initiative. And that's absolutely been a remarkable thing, and we're still struggling trying to get it up and running. In response to Rennie down there, just a little bit on the suicide hotline, one of the bills that David and I worked very close on was the Safe to Tell bill, which is an anonymous tip program that's in all the schools. And you cannot believe the numbers of young people using that to talk about suicide, to talk about, little Johnny said he's going to bring his gun to school and shoot somebody. And believe me, this is going on. It happened over in Gillette. So anyway, Safe to Tell is a really, really neat program, and it's in the schools. I know Jay Curtis, superintendent here in Powell, knows about it as well. So thank you, Cindy.
Thank you. So we come right back where we started to a picture that's sitting on my desk, and I look at this every day. And as you can tell, that many of us deeply ponder on the issues that we've discussed today. And I really want to say thank you for having us. It was such a privilege and honor to come to your community and to embrace you in this conversation. And I hope that we set the stage of exactly, you know, what that gentleman is feeling, you know, as that horse is about to flip over on him. Like, this is hard. These issues are hard. There is no silver bullet. The days of, you know, we're going to have big numbers bail us out, over. It is going to take a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here. That cumulative impact is what's going to power us into the future. So please be part of the conversation. And as I said earlier, help our elected officials come up with ideas. And taxes are not just the only thing talking, you know, like there's way more in this continuum of options if we could just allow ourselves to get past no. Like, let's just have a conversation and try to explore some of those options, like Senator Coe outlined on what we've been doing in the realm of preparedness for jobs of the future. This is really important. It's going to take all hands on deck for us in Wyoming. So as we close, this is clearly just the beginning of the conversation. And we, you know, as I said earlier, let's encourage our leaders to act and have you be part of that solution on what that action should look like. Thank you.
And real quick, we'll have the slides posted. Cindy's information also for the Wyoming Business Alliance. You can find them online as well. And the Wyoming Taxpayers Association also has a website. Ashley, is it wyomingtaxpayersassociation.com or .org? .org. So thank you, panelists, so much for making the trip. And feel free to hang out and answer your questions.
Yeah, but then I came down.